Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Saturday morning, 8 o'clock a.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, August 31st. I'm glad to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another Restoration. It's just a new show that I put together after speaking with a good friend of mine who's been tuning into my shows for a long time, pretty much since the beginning, in November 2009. And she was just saying, it'd be good if you would put this together, just talk a little bit about the actual process of how the healing journey sort of began, and then working through it so that people can sort of what one survivor's healing journey looked like. Mine is definitely self-help. I didn't do any counseling or anything like that. Didn't have any formal type of counseling. I did speak with some counselors here and there, just regarding my past and whatnot, but didn't do any formal stuff. But I did join some groups, online support groups, which was very helpful in the very beginning of my journey, and stayed on there for about a year, and then moved on because I just really became too busy doing what I was doing here on Blog Talk Radio, as well as advocating against child abuse and speaking out against really human rights abuses. And so I just thought, yeah, why not? I'll do that, just sort of piece it all together for people so they can sort of see what helped for me. It doesn't necessarily mean it would help for anybody else. We all have have our own specific thing to deal with if we're survivors, and we all have different varying degrees of issues that we need to deal with, and we're all different. So what works for me may not work for somebody else, and what worked for somebody else may not work for me. But I did do a whole lot of looking at all aspects of healing journey type information way back in One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, back in 2009, 2010, 2011. And so, yeah, if anybody wants to go back and listen to all those shows, that's what I'm talking about, going through all the different types of sort of issues that survivors like myself have to deal with. Maybe not on an everyday basis, but at some point they'll come up for a lot of people. Maybe not for everybody. Like I said, it's all just depends on your situation, right? So we left off last week talking about sort of like the roles that we play in family situations where if the family's dysfunctional and codependent and a lot of abuse or abusive type behavior going on, we play roles sort of specific to our own situation within the family. And I was talking about that last week where, my family now, even today, the remaining members of my family expect me to play the same role I was playing years and years ago through my youth and my teens and into my 20s, that they expect me to play that role and continue on in that role, so they treat me accordingly, which is dysfunctional, abusive, and downright disrespectful. And so that's why I have nothing to do with them, and I cut them off. But that's sort of where I left off the show last week, was just talking about the fact that I made a decision to cut all ties with my whole entire bloodline family, because I realized that they were toxic, and I was on a healing journey, and there was no way I was going to be able to ever relate with them. We could never relate before, when I wasn't on my healing journey, and we were never going to be able to relate again, even when I'm on my healing journey, because they see me in a specific light and don't want to treat me with respect and dignity, which every human being deserves. And that's what I put my foot down, and I was like, no, I'm in charge of who's in my life. And so that's sort of where I left off last week. And progressing through my shows back, especially in 2009, when I first started doing them, after I cut all ties with my family, heading towards summer of 2010, it was quite empowering. It did give me a sense of control, which I was talking about there, that I had never had before, because I just felt like, well, family's family, you just stick it out, take whatever you got to take, and, deal with it. And at that point, when I realized that, no, I have the power to say who comes in my life. And if people are hurting me or people are being completely abusive and rude, then I don't have to have them in my life. And it's not their choice that they're in my life. It's my choice. And so it really did empower me to realize that, yeah, I decide who I choose to let into my life and who I choose to allow to be around me, and that was good, because as a survivor of abuse, we can tend to, I don't know if this would be the case for everybody, but I know for myself, because I grew up in such a dysfunctional home, it's easy for me to allow dysfunctional people to be around me because I'm used to it. I'm used to dealing with people's craziness and abuse, and even in the workplace I've run into it. I've had bosses that have thrown stuff at me and hit me in the head with stuff, which is literally true. I could have probably taken them to court, but I didn't. There's going to be someone somewhere who will, because of their own issues and their own inabilities to handle things correctly and properly, have the potential, we all do, have the potential, if we're not watching what we're doing, to hurt other people. And it's not just within families. This can happen in the workplace. It can happen in friendships. It can happen on the street, in traffic, because people, we can't control other people, but we can control what we do, and we can control who we let in our life and what we will tolerate. And so as I was working through my healing journey there, reading a lot of stuff in, especially John Bradshaw's books and Robert Burney, B-U-R-N-E-Y, Burney, I started to realize, wow, I have the power to control who comes into my life. I have the power to say no to abuse. I don't have to allow people to hurt me just because they're in my life, just because they're bloodline, family member, just because they're a friend, whatever. We don't have to tolerate that. And so it was very empowering for me to go through all that work and actually get rid of the people that were actually very toxic and causing me a lot of stress and distress, which was my immediate family. But in the meantime, I still had a lot of stuff to work through, and so I started just methodically kind of going through, looking at what were my issues, and what, I had already gone through and wrote A Life of Death and Redemption, which was a blog, first of all, that I put out, public-facing blog, which became the book. Excuse me, my voice isn't quite here yet. And so in doing that, writing that story, it actually, because it was a truthful account of what happened to my siblings as well as myself and my mom, right? And it did obviously a lot of memories and stir up a lot of old feelings of anger, but I had already had all that issues going on before, like I was talking about back in just prior to starting my healing journey in 2007. And so I had looked at the big picture, and I took a big look at what happened, who was at fault, who was really responsible for this mess, which my parents were completely responsible for it, but they never took responsibility, but they were responsible for the whole mess. And but it did allow me to put things in place, first of all, and I began to start to realize I had several issues that I needed to work through. And a lot of them, I wouldn't even say, I don't know, the word confidence or anything like that. I've always had confidence in my abilities, but I had a lot of leftover baggage because of the verbal abuse, the physical abuse, just the memories, the flashbacks, the sexual abuse. I didn't even want to face that until I was ready and until I could actually deal with it. So I started just looking at things like verbal abuse and physical abuse and anger management and a lot of stuff like that, just reading through material that I found online as well as in books, and really started studying this stuff because I needed to see where I was at and why I was doing what I was doing, why I was allowing certain things to happen in my life, and why I was doing certain things myself, such as self-sabotaging at the workplace. As a person who's been abused, it's easy to become re-victimized. I looked at re-victimization, looked at all kinds of stuff, just dealing with the aspects of abuse and what abuse survivors have to deal with. And that helped me as I was looking at it from a different perspective. I wasn't looking at it from the point of necessarily that I was in 2007 as being such a wounded victim was actually looking at it as maybe as a third party would look in and see the situation, and it did help me to put a lot of things together that I had never put together before. That was just looking at my parents' behaviors and why they did what they did and what they were doing and what that caused my siblings to do, what that caused me to do. And then started looking at just specific elements of abuse and talking through my own story as well as the information that was available. And it was very helpful for me to do that because it did open up my eyes to a lot of stuff that I would have probably not looked at or thought about along the road. Does it mean it's any less hurtful what happened to me as a child? No. I mean, that pain is real and it's there. But I'm now able to put it into perspective and realize that, hey, the abuse is not happening now. I'm not being abused now. This is in the past, so I need to deal with it accordingly, you know. And I need to learn how to get my emotions in check, and I need to learn how to realize that, yeah, no, I'm a functioning adult, and I'm not that abused child anymore. I'm not that person that I was so many years ago. I'm much stronger, much more capable as an adult. I can do this, so it started to really empower me to actually go through that stuff and work through it. And I was, I was looking specifically at things like verbal abuse, and verbal abuse is such a serious issue. People just don't realize how serious verbal abuse actually is and what it can do to a child and to teens and to anybody, really, to adults, right? People, I don't think, take it all that serious. They think, oh, well, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words, names will never hurt me or whatever. And the issue is that that's false. Sticks and stones can break your bones, but words do hurt, and they don't go away. And then the person who's had to deal with the barrage of verbal abuse has to put it someplace, change it, right? And so I did a lot of work in looking at verbal abuse. I'll just start with verbal abuse, really, because I think that's pretty much what I started with when I was doing my shows in 2010, really. And just looking through at what the verbal abuse actually did and what it caused me to do and what it caused me to believe about myself and what it caused, how it caused me to behave, really. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And I started to realize that none of those things that I was told as a child were true. I was not a bad child. I was not an evil child. I was not all those things that they said. And that would be my parents mainly and some of my siblings and some of my teachers and various people who had hurt me in my past. I thought, no, I'm none of those things. And truthfully, they don't really, and they never did really know me. I mean, anybody who's going to sit around and abuse their children doesn't know their children all that well. They don't care to know them. And I thought, wow, I was never any of those things, and I'm not now any of those things. And I mean, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not that stuff. Maybe I'm a little bit, unorganized, or maybe even somewhat lazy. But I'm none of those other things that those people told me I was. And so I started to realize, like, wow, I have a lot of work to do to go through and change the way I feel about myself. And it was a huge issue because I had this sort of cloud hanging around, I guess, over top of me that was weighing me down, saying, oh, you're no good. You're useless. All the stuff that people had told me before. Mainly my mother was responsible for most of it. But my dad also as well, some of it, and some of my siblings, and then throughout the years, other people. And I thought, no, I'm none of those things. I never was any of those things. And I started to have to realize, who am I? Like, if I'm none of those things and I'm not really what they told me, which was a bunch of garbage and lies, really, who am I? And what do I stand for? And what, who do I think I am? I know that all that stuff was very hurtful to me as a child, and it was still hurting me as a 42, 43, 44-year-old woman. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm going to have to learn how to change the way I feel about myself and how I feel about life, really. in order to make this thing work for me, because coming through that type of harsh abuse year after year after year after year, I had to take on a new way of looking at things. And I thought, I'm going to have to get rid of that old stuff, stop thinking like that, as if I was any of those things, and allow myself to be who I really am. And remember that none of those things were true, and that they were all lies. It was all false accusations and false information given to me by very sick individuals who needed psychological help, and not take any of that on. So that's tough, because even today, if I make a mistake, it's hard for me to deal with that, especially if I have somebody yelling at me and telling me something about what I've done. It puts me right back into my childhood of, you're no good, you're useless, you should have been dead, you should have been born dead. My mother used to tell me all kinds of stuff like that. You should have died, you should have never lived, you're worthless, you're a whore, you're a slut, whatever, just horrible things that I knew were not true. They still hurt because that was my mother's view of me. And so looking at that, seeing myself in her eyes, that's what I was. And so that's really hard, because I was none of those things. And now even today, I look at, I have to sit there and I think, well, okay, first of all, who's doing the yelling? What kind of, I have to own up to my mistakes. I have to own up to my problems. And I have to own up to my issues that I've caused or that I've done. Take responsibility. Because a lot of people don't want to take responsibility, and that's what's bugged me about abuse, really. Because abusers don't want to take responsibility for what they've done. And I figured, hey, if I think that abusers should take responsibility for what they've done, which I do, think that they all should have to, whether in the court of law or just in their own psyche and their own capabilities in their own lives, take responsibility, then I myself have to be responsible. I can't say that one group of people should have to take responsibility for what they do and then me no, right? So there's no double standard. It's like everybody needs to take responsibility for what they do. So then, okay, you know what? I have to realize I'm not perfect. I'm a human being. I make mistakes, and I am not going to allow these types of things to go or meet up with my past abuse. Because if they do, at that point, then what that does is bring me back to that position I was in as a child, who was suffering greatly and really just wanted to die. And as an adult, I can't afford to go there anymore. You know what I mean? Like I can't afford to let myself do that to myself, because that's exactly what that is. When somebody today puts their garbage on me, I don't have to receive it. I don't have to accept it. I don't have to allow people to mistreat me, whether it's on the street, in the workplace, on transit, at my home, in the building I live in. No. People, if they don't have respect for you and they don't see you in a certain light, that has nothing to do with my childhood. And it has nothing to do with the abuse that I suffered as a child. But for many, many years, that stuff would bring up and bring about all kinds of basically trauma-related PTSD stuff. And I would quit jobs over stuff like that. I would scream at bosses and would stomp out and leave because, I'm not a wimp. I'm definitely not a wimp. I just live on the right side of the law. And because I value my freedom, and I don't think people should hurt other people. And see, there's no double standard, right? I don't believe in. I try really hard to not be a double standard person. I don't like that. I don't appreciate it about people. What I do and what I expect others to do should be the same. There's no, that person, they shouldn't do that, and then I go and do it. That's double standard. I've never liked that, because my parents were double standard. They loved other people's children, and they used to think of that other people were horrible to their kids, and then what they did to their children was just 250 million times worse. And they lived such a double standard type of life, right? And I don't appreciate it at all. So for myself, I have to, if I'm strong in my convictions and I know, I don't want to hurt people, I don't want to be an abusive type person, right? An abuser, you know. If I'm fighting against that stuff, then I can't be that stuff, you know. But I mean, this stuff used to affect me in a large way. I mean, I would, you know, quit jobs, like I said, leave places, move across the city or move across the country to get away from that type of situation, instead of facing up to it and saying, look, I'm a person, I'm a human being, and yeah, I own up to my mistakes. That's fine, but don't treat me like garbage. So now, you know, I'm actually able to function a lot better in the workplace and out in the world, because there are a lot of people out there that, I mean, 90% need psychological help. It's just that nobody really will go, including myself, because nobody trusts that many people with their lives, you know what I mean? But there are a lot of really hurting, sick individuals out there who will just hurt everybody else around them because they're screwed up. So what we have to remember as survivors of abuse is not to take that on and not to get mixed up with that stuff and then mix it up with our past and mix it up with what we went through as children or as in an abusive situation where it comes together again, and because that's not at all what's happening. You know, I mean, somebody's doing something to me today as an adult has nothing to do with my childhood. So I had to learn to draw the line and say, no, that was then and this is now, and this has absolutely nothing to do with what happened then. And that's tough. It's tough at first to see where that line is and actually keep that stuff separated and not allow it to go and mingle back together again, because then that's a harsh way to live. And I know I did it for 42 years, cognitively for probably 35, and it's a tough way to live. It's a hard existence because there's always going to be somebody doing something hurtful. That's just how people are. And if they, you know, people that hurt, I mean, everybody hurts people. I've hurt people, but I always try to make it right, because I realize how horrible it is to do stuff like that. So if we hurt somebody and we realize it, or they tell us, yeah, you know, you hurt me, or even if they don't tell us and we know we've done something hurtful, we need to make it right. And to me, that's about the only way that a person can grow. Because, yeah, people do make mistakes and they do stupid things, and that's just all there is to it. So we are going to run into that stuff, and we're going to maybe do it ourselves, or we're going to run into people doing it for us, to us, not for us, but to us. And so we have to be careful not to take that stuff on and not allow that to bring us back down into that pit of despair or that pity party that I used to find. People, and it was for a good reason, because, I mean, I'd like for somebody to walk. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I wouldn't like for somebody to have to walk through my shoes, because that's a horrible place. I would never wish that on anybody, because I think that, you know, it's just wrong. But I would like for somebody else to have to see where I've been and personally get a feeling and a grip of the horror involved and just the sheer trauma and sadness and despair and complete devastation, and then come and talk to me. You know what I mean? We're all human. We all know what it's like to hurt, and we all know what it's like to be the person who's hurting people. There isn't one person on this planet that could ever say, oh, I've never done anything wrong and I've never hurt anybody. I know there's a lot of people out there that think they're perfect, but they're just completely wrong, and they're just living in some sort of a fantasy world. We've all hurt people, and we all need to remember that we need to make it right, and if at all possible, you know. But then again, we all need to realize that we don't have to allow ourselves to be hurt. We don't have to take abuse from anybody. As children, that's the problem. As children, you're just forced to endure whatever's dished out, but unless you can get some help, you know, or you realize that, you know, that this is wrong and you should be getting help, or have the ability to get help, which most young babies and children don't have that capability. And then you might even just be an adult being abused in an abusive situation with a partner or someone. And you need to realize that love is not abuse, and abuse is not love, and love has nothing to do with abuse. Abuse is about controlling. You know, and I loved my parents, but it doesn't excuse what they did to us. And I used to think I hated my parents, but I didn't hate my parents. I hated what they were doing, but I loved my parents. But it doesn't mean that what they did was okay just because I loved them. And they hated each other. And what they did to each other was not okay. And what they did to us was not okay. It's not okay to allow somebody to abuse you or to mistreat you. And as children, you can't help it, but as an adult, you can. And there's many people that get stuck in situations, unless you're gagged and tied up and locked away in a basement somewhere, then you have the options to get out. And the options sometimes don't look good because you end up in some shelter or someplace you don't want to be for a long time. You know what? It's better than losing your life, and it's better than just being held prisoner by somebody who isn't even keeping you in chains, but you're still a prisoner. My mother was a prisoner. She wasn't locked up. She wasn't locked and tied down, but she was a prisoner in her own mind for her whole entire life. And she always thought that she was stuck, and she was never stuck. And as an adult, like, I realize that, and I know, I choose who comes in my life, and I choose who I allow to be in my life, and I choose what I will tolerate from them, and I set boundaries, and I know where those boundaries are, and I know what I will tolerate, what I won't tolerate. But on the other hand, I also know that how I treat other people is the same. It's the same standards. So what I would not want somebody to do to me, then I need to be even more careful to not do that to them. And so, because growing up abused, you learn all kinds of little tactics, and you learn all kinds of ways to hurt people. I learned how to hurt people because I was hurt. I could hurt people. That's the whole issue. There's the potential to hurt somebody, like I was saying before. It's a matter of whether we can control ourselves and allow ourselves to realize that, no, I'm not going to do that. And if you do hurt somebody, make it right. Because that's what should have been done in the first place for people that are hurting other people. We have to own up and be responsible for our own behavior if we're going to expect other people to do the same. And so, I think that everybody just deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And that dignity is a human dignity. It's like I don't like somebody screaming at me, so then I don't scream at other people. I don't like somebody calling me names, so then I don't call other people names. I don't like somebody running me down, so I don't run other people down. That's the standard that we should be living by. And, affording people dignity and honor. And that's just not part of our culture today. And it never was, not since I don't know when it would have ever been. And that's what we have to deal with out here. And so, by going through and looking at all these different components of abuse and what it does, it actually allowed me to see the truth behind what was going on in my family's existence in this dysfunctional situation. Like why I did what I was doing and why I was continuing to do what I was doing throughout my adult life because of what happened as a child. So I had to learn how to put things where they needed to be, and do some work. I did some positive affirmation stuff, which was helpful, and I also did some journaling, and I did writing. I did I wrote my book, A Life of Death or Redemption, and the blog and everything, and that was very helpful. But I also did some work every time that I heard those old words that were told to me, those old hurtful, horrible things, I would run through my positive affirmations and say, no, I am none of those things. I'm strong. I'm a good person. I try to be a good person, and this type of stuff. And every time I heard a negative thing coming into my thought process, in my own mind, right, from the past, that's what I would do. And it was very, very helpful. So, hopefully this show is helping somebody out there. I really appreciate everybody who's tuning into my shows. And, if you have a question or you want to come on the air, just let me know. You can, if I see you here, I'll let you on. I have a chat room that I'm putting open now. I had stopped doing the chat rooms because there's so many trolls. It's hard to control all the trolls, get rid of them off the show. So, but you're welcome to get a hold of me if you have any questions. And should be back on next Saturday, and we'll take a look at. We'll just continue on. And if you're having trouble and you just can't seem to cope, and you're in a situation that's just horrible, you make sure you reach out. Reach out to somebody. Do not allow yourself to suffer on and silence and on your own. just find somebody trustworthy that you just look around and make sure they are trustworthy, and reach out and get some help, right? Because there are really good people out there, and there are really decent people out there, but you just have to be careful, look it out, and search it out, and make sure that they are trustworthy, right? And reach out and get some help. And if you're really having a hard time, you call a crisis line. I mean, I want to be one of those crisis line volunteers. You call a crisis line. You do whatever you have to do. But you stay and you keep yourself here, and you get help, and you make sure that you get what you need, because you deserve it. You're a human being on the planet, and we all deserve it. And for that very reason, do not ever give up, right? Just keep going and keep looking for that help right where you can find it. And we'll talk to you real soon. God bless. Bye-bye.